because there's no ongoing negotiation.
Second largest export by value at $51 billion. The vast majority of those, 93%, go to the U.S.
In just one night, over $100 billion worth of U.S. liquefied natural gas LNG export deals vanished. That staggering figure has left the American energy sector reeling. Major infrastructure projects built with billions in investment across Texas and Louisiana are now teetering on the brink of redundancy. These terminals were designed to supply LNG to Europe for decades to come. But with Europe pulling the plug on future gas imports, the very foundation of America's LNG export boom is under threat. The political fallout has been swift. President Donald Trump, who once championed energy dominance, has publicly lashed out at the European Union, calling the move a total betrayal of the U.S. by its supposed allies. The shock wasn't just rhetorical, it was financial. Shares of Cheniere Energy, the largest U.S. LNG exporter, plunged 7% overnight following news of the cancellations. This sent ripples through Wall Street, where investors were blindsided by what had long been considered safe long-term contracts. But the truth is, those contracts were far more fragile than previously believed. According to a May 2025 S&P Global report, only 38% of LNG contracts between U.S. exporters and European buyers are fully binding, meaning the remaining 62% include flexible clauses, opt-out conditions, or were signed through intermediaries like utilities or energy traders instead of national governments. These clauses give European entities significant leeway to back out without facing serious penalties. And this isn't just about contracts, it's about long-term infrastructure risk. Over the past few years, American companies have invested more than $120 billion into expanding LNG terminals, building pipelines, and securing global shipping routes, all with the assumption that Europe would remain a reliable buyer for decades. Now, with those buyers walking away, billions of dollars in U.S. energy infrastructure face the very real risk of becoming obsolete, not years from now, but within the next few political cycles. So, what exactly happened? Why would Europe, a continent that faced an energy meltdown just 3 years ago, suddenly abandon the very gas lifeline that helped pull it back from the brink? The answer lies in a radical but quiet shift in the European Union's energy strategy. Originally, the EU's post-2022 energy policy was focused solely on severing its dependence on Russian fossil fuels in response to geopolitical tensions. But by 2025, this objective had evolved, and dramatically so. The EU is no longer just distancing itself from Russian gas. It has now set its sights on phasing out all imported fossil fuels, including liquefied natural gas LNG from the United States. This pivot was not broadcast with headlines or press conferences. Instead, it unfolded through a series of strategic policy updates, energy ministry memos, and public infrastructure decisions that sent a clear, albeit subtle message: foreign gas, no matter the source, is no longer welcome. Germany was one of the first major players to signal this transition. Just a few years ago, Germany built 4 new LNG import terminals and signed multiple 20-year contracts with U.S. suppliers, positioning American LNG as a crucial bridge fuel toward a greener future. But in April 2025, Berlin reversed course. The German government announced that no new long-term gas contracts would be signed after 2030, not with Russia, not with Qatar, and crucially, not with the United States. Their energy minister was blunt: gas isn't our future, and we don't want a new dependency. That statement sent a ripple effect across Europe. France, meanwhile, is doubling down on its own vision of energy independence. Instead of turning to imported gas, the French government has launched a bold plan to build 14 new nuclear reactors by 2040. At the same time, it has halted all new LNG contract negotiations beyond 2030, even with long-trusted U.S. exporters. France's strategy is crystal clear: replace imported gas with nuclear power and green hydrogen, not fossil fuels from across the Atlantic. Spain, once considered Europe's LNG hub, has followed a similar trajectory. In March 2025, Spain's energy ministry publicly declared a moratorium on new LNG infrastructure projects beyond 2026. Rather than expand its role as a gateway for global gas, Spain is now prioritizing investments in solar power and green hydrogen, aiming to meet its climate targets while slashing reliance on volatile energy imports. Together, these moves represent a fundamental reorientation of European energy policy, not as a response to crisis, but as a proactive strategy. Europe is no longer acting like a desperate customer. It is behaving like an assertive energy power, strategically severing ties to fossil fuel suppliers in pursuit of long-term autonomy. And in this new calculus, the United States, once the savior of Europe's gas supply, is now seen as part of the problem, not the solution. In the United States, LNG companies are now facing unexpected challenges as European demand shifts more rapidly than anticipated. Recent developments in Europe's energy policy have created significant ripples across the U.S. liquefied natural gas (LNG) sector. For years, American exporters operated under the assumption that Europe would remain a stable long-term buyer of LNG, especially after the 2022 energy crisis, which saw U.S. gas play a critical role in filling the void left by reduced Russian supply. In response, companies invested heavily in export terminals, pipelines, and shipping infrastructure. However, Europe's changing priorities are now putting some of those assumptions and investments under pressure. Several major U.S. LNG infrastructure projects have been affected. Developments such as the Rio Grande LNG project in Texas and Plaquemines Phase 2 in Louisiana have reportedly experienced delays or reassessments as companies respond to evolving market signals. These were originally planned to meet projected European demand, but with long-term contracts being reconsidered or avoided altogether, the economic viability of such expansions is being reviewed more cautiously. Financial markets have also taken note. On Wall Street, this kind of exposure is increasingly referred to as forward risk, the financial risk associated with having invested in capacity based on demand projections that may not materialize. LNG, by its nature, is a long-term business, and when geopolitical or policy changes disrupt expectations, the effects can be significant. One of the underlying issues is the structure of many transatlantic LNG contracts. Rather than being secured directly between governments, a large portion of US-EU LNG deals were signed through intermediaries, such as utilities and trading firms. These agreements often include flexible terms such as volume adjustments or opt-out clauses tied to changes in domestic policy or demand. As a result, many of these deals, while long-term on paper, can be scaled back or terminated without severe penalties. From an industry standpoint, this adds complexity to long-term planning. While the U.S. remains a global leader in LNG production and demand from other regions such as Asia still exists, the sharp shift in European policy introduces new levels of uncertainty. Companies may need to adapt their strategies, seek more diversified customer bases, or renegotiate terms to better align with evolving global energy dynamics. As U.S. LNG faces headwinds, other global players are quietly stepping into the vacuum. While the United States contends with a shifting demand landscape in Europe, other major powers are recalibrating their energy strategies and, in some cases, expanding their influence. The global LNG market is not retreating. Rather, it is reorganizing. As Europe reduces its reliance on American fossil fuels, countries like Russia and China are capitalizing on the opportunity to secure long-term positions. In the first quarter of 2025, Russia increased its LNG exports to Europe by 36%, despite the existing sanctions on pipeline gas. This resurgence is occurring largely through seaborne shipments, which fall outside the scope of some of the more stringent sanctions. Russian LNG is still being received by ports in Spain, France, and Belgium, often via third-party traders or intermediary markets, making the true origin of some shipments difficult to trace. This strategy allows Europe to meet part of its energy needs while technically adhering to its sanctions policy, a sign that geopolitical tensions are not entirely aligned with market behavior. Meanwhile, China is pursuing a more long-term structured approach. Since the beginning of 2025, Beijing has signed over $40 billion in LNG import agreements, securing supplies that will last well into the 2040s. These deals are not only with traditional partners such as Qatar and Australia, but also with Russia and Mozambique, reflecting China's strategic aim to diversify its sources and reduce exposure to short-term market volatility. In addition to long-term supply agreements, Chinese firms are taking a more active role in upstream investments. Companies from China are co-investing in production and export infrastructure, including major projects like Cheniere Energy's expansion, Russia's Arctic LNG 2, and Mozambique's LNG developments. This dual strategy, combining long-term purchases with direct investment positions, China as not just a buyer but a stakeholder in the global LNG supply chain. These efforts are paying off. In May 2025, Bloomberg reported that China had officially surpassed the European Union to become the world's largest importer of LNG. This marks a significant milestone in the global energy transition and highlights a broader shift in market power from west to east. Collectively, these developments suggest a redistribution of energy influence. As Europe pulls back and the U.S. reconsiders its role, other players are moving quickly to shape the next chapter of the LNG market. The rise of China as a dominant buyer and the repositioning of Russian LNG flows reflect how energy economics and geopolitics are increasingly intertwined, and how rapidly the global map can change when long-standing assumptions are upended. Before starting the next part, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more breaking news. As global energy priorities shift and traditional markets contract, the United States may soon face a new and complex challenge: an oversupplied LNG market with not enough long-term demand to absorb it. According to projections by Mackenzie, if current trends continue, particularly Europe's accelerating withdrawal from fossil fuel imports, the global LNG market could see a 15% surplus by 2028. This would represent one of the most significant mismatches between supply and demand in recent memory. An oversupplied market often comes with serious financial consequences. The most immediate risk is a collapse in global LNG prices, which would not only hurt U.S. exporters, but could have ripple effects across the broader energy sector. Falling prices may force companies to scale back operations, delay future investments, or renegotiate existing contracts under less favorable terms. It could also trigger intense competition among suppliers, further eroding profit margins. And the consequences wouldn't be limited to the U.S. LNG industry alone. A global glut would also undercut emerging LNG producers in regions like Mozambique and Nigeria, whose projects rely heavily on competitive pricing and long-term financing. Likewise, Middle Eastern suppliers could be forced to offer steeper discounts, reshaping price dynamics across Asia, Africa, and Europe. In essence, the imbalance between production capacity and secure demand could destabilize the global LNG market for years to come. Beyond the economic risks, there are strategic implications as well. The U.S. LNG boom over the past decade was not just about revenue, it also represented a form of energy diplomacy, giving Washington leverage in global affairs by supplying gas to allies and partners. If long-term buyers disappear or pivot elsewhere, the U.S. could lose both market share and geopolitical influence. Countries that were once dependent on American LNG may begin forming new partnerships with other suppliers, many of whom have different political agendas or strategic interests. In this future, the U.S. may still remain a major producer, but its ability to shape the global energy landscape could be significantly diminished. Adapting to this scenario will likely require a combination of diversifying export destinations, increasing contract flexibility, and pursuing energy technologies that align more closely with the global shift toward decarbonization. Ultimately, the coming years will test whether the U.S. LNG sector can evolve quickly enough to stay relevant in a market that is no longer defined solely by supply capacity, but by policy sustainability and long-term strategic alignment. This didn't begin with a supply shortage. It began with a quiet shift in Europe's energy strategy, and now the U.S. is feeling the consequences. Just a few years ago, the United States was hailed as Europe's energy savior, stepping in during a time of crisis. But in 2025, that momentum has reversed. As Europe races ahead with clean energy and long-term independence, the U.S. is facing stalled projects, market uncertainty, and shrinking influence. President Trump may call it betrayal, but the deeper issue lies in a lack of strategic alignment and long-term adaptability. In the new energy era, being a major supplier is no longer enough. Being a consistent and trusted partner matters more.